From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Tuesday, October 28th. Here's what we're covering on today's episode. With just over 1 week until Election Day, early voting turnout rates in Albuquerque and other parts of New Mexico suggest many voters may be feeling less than enthusiastic about heading to the polls. With more on what these numbers are telling us, I'm now joined by the Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd, who's been following this story. Dan, thank you so much as always for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Dan, as we mentioned at the top, Election Day fast approaching and early voting going on across New Mexico in many local elections. But as your story points out today, turnout has been really low so far. What can you tell us about what the figures are?
Yeah, some of this is, it's typical. Obviously, it's not a presidential election year. It's not a statewide election. So usually we do see lower turnout levels in these kind of local elections, that we're having this year. But the numbers so far, as of today, as of this afternoon, about a little over 9% of registered Albuquerque voters have cast a ballot. And we only have, Saturday is the last day of early voting and then Election Day next Tuesday. So, reaching the end of early voting and still to have less than 10% of registered voters having cast a ballot. I spoke with Brian Sanderoff today, who's been following New Mexico elections for a long time. And he described it as kind of a sluggish turnout so far. And, at this rate, it's unlikely that Albuquerque in particular would hit the turnout rate of 32% from the mayoral race just 4 years ago.
And Dan, something that your story points out that I found rather interesting is the fact that so far in early voting, Democrats are leading participation, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We were able to kind of, with the help of Brian Sanderoff, kind of crunch some of these voter turnout numbers so far. And going into today, Democrats are voting at a slightly higher rate than Republicans. About 9.5% of Democrats had cast a ballot compared to about 8.4% of Republicans. Independent voters were even lower, only a little over 4% of independents had cast a ballot. So, in some ways, not surprising, Democrats tend to gravitate toward early voting and absentee voting more than Republicans. But, in a city already where Democrats have a pretty significant advantage over Republicans, that's going to make it difficult, I think, for someone who's not a registered Democrat to win this year, even though technically it's a nonpartisan race for mayor.
And speaking of Albuquerque's mayoral election, it is a very crowded field this year, Dan. 6 candidates on the ballot. The interesting part about that, though, is that a recent Journal poll actually found that 37% of likely Albuquerque voters are still undecided on who they're going to be voting for.
Yeah, that was an eye-opening figure to me. That poll was done about a month ago. So by now, I think some of those 37% probably have decided, who they're going to vote for. But I do think that there's a correlation between this large number of undecided voters and the low turnout rates that we're seeing so far. I talked to Brian Sanderoff about that, and he said, yes, some people may still be making up their mind. Some people may just decide not to vote, that they don't really find any candidate that speaks to them or that they believe they want to, take the time to go vote for.
And Dan, let's zoom out a little bit from the Albuquerque of it all and look at other parts of the state. They're seeing similar low voter turnout, right?
Yeah, I was curious if this was just kind of an Albuquerque phenomenon, but looked at some other places where they are also having mayoral elections, Santa Fe, Roswell, Taos, just to name a few. And turnout levels so far in all of those municipalities are also low. Santa Fe was at about 6.2% heading into Monday. Taos at only 4.8%, and Chavez County, where Roswell is based, about 4.7%. So clearly those numbers will go up some over the coming days. And Saturday, the last day of early voting, is usually a pretty busy day. But Brian Sanderoff said in recent years, we've usually seen more than half the total number of people end up voting before Election Day than on Election Day. So, clearly to get to decent turnout rates, candidates are going to have to try to really bring out voters on Election Day. And even then, we might end up seeing some pretty low turnout levels.
And last question before I let you go, Dan. You've mentioned Brian Sanderoff a couple times during this interview and how he's been a longtime follower of elections here in New Mexico. I'm curious if he gave any inkling on if he expects voter turnout to kind of pick up as we near the end of early voting and on Election Day.
Yeah, he did mention that I think with Saturday being the last day of early voting, that there could be a little bump. He said at the current rate, kind of turnout rates have been going up by about 1% a day. So, when you kind of calculate that we've still got 5 more days of early voting, that could go up a bit, and then Election Day. But, as we discussed earlier, getting to above a 30% turnout rate seems unlikely at this point, unless there is a really big turnout next week on Election Day.
So early voting across New Mexico, pretty slow so far this election cycle, but possibly maybe a bit of a pickup as we head towards the end of early voting and on Election Day. Journal Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd stopping by to share the figures with us. Thank you so much, Dan.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it.
In other headlines from the newsroom, 4 years after being fired from New Mexico State University for refusing to follow COVID-19 vaccine, testing, and mask mandates, former law professor David Clemens is suing to get his job back. Clemens argues that new federal policies under Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. vindicate his opposition to those mandates. Clemens, who gained national attention on conservative media for challenging both pandemic restrictions and the 2020 election results, filed a lawsuit in September against NMSU, its regents, and others, claiming the university violated his contract and engaged in deceptive business practices by enforcing policies tied to federal COVID-19 funding. The lawsuit cites Kennedy's recent rollbacks of vaccine recommendations and the cancellation of mRNA research funding as evidence supporting Clemens' long-held skepticism about vaccines and testing methods. NMSU, which dropped its COVID rules in 2022, has asked the court to dismiss the case, arguing it's barred by the statute of limitations and that employment disputes don't qualify under consumer protection law. Clemens, who is representing himself, says his firing was retaliation for publicly opposing NMSU leadership and insists he has, quote, been vindicated by recent federal changes and the political shift under President Donald Trump's return to office. New Mexicans will soon have the chance to review or change their healthcare coverage as the 2026 Annual Enrollment Period, or AEP, begins. For those who buy insurance through the state marketplace Be Well, enrollment runs from November 1st, 2025 through January 15th, 2026. For Medicare recipients, the window is already open and will continue through December 7th. Both groups will face higher costs next year, however. The Medicare Part B premium is projected to rise by $21.50 to $206.50 per month, with a deductible increase to $288. A new cap will limit out-of-pocket prescription drug costs from $2,100 for Part D, though Part D premiums will also increase. On the market side, Affordable Care Act plan rates will rise by an average of 35.7%, raising the average monthly cost from $112.34 to about $152.45. Officials cite rising medical costs and high demands for care as key factors. Consumers can use Be Well's online shopping compare tool to find plans and potential savings or get free help from a Be Well advisor. Medicare users can compare options at Medicare.gov. People happy with their current Be Well plan do not need to re-enroll, but anyone seeking changes must do so during this period. Officials also warn that Medicare scams increase during this season and are advising the public to avoid sharing personal information with unsolicited callers or emails and visit consumer.ftc.gov for fraud prevention tips. An upcoming Broadham's auction in November will feature a wide range of late actor Gene Hackman's personal belongings, from Golden Globe statues and movie memorabilia to paintings and fine art collected during his retirement in Santa Fe. Hackman, who died at the age of 95 alongside his wife Betsy Arakawa earlier this year, left behind a collection that reflects both his celebrated Hollywood career and his later life passions for painting and writing. Authorities said Hackman died of heart disease with complications from Alzheimer's, while Arakawa succumbed to hantavirus pulmonary syndrome about a week earlier. Among the auction items are Hackman's own still life painting, his Golden Globes for Unforgiven and the Royal Tannenbaums, annotated film scripts, and fine art such as works by Rodin and Milton Avery. Prices range from $100 for personal effects like his dartboard to $600 for his Cinco diver's watch. Bonham says the sale offers a, quote, intimate portrait of the Oscar-winning actor who starred in classics such as The French Connection, Hoosiers, and Superman, before retiring from film in the early 2000s. And Boots in the Park is set to return to Albuquerque's Balloon Fiesta Park on May 15th and 16th next year, featuring headliners Jelly Roll and Post Malone in a 2-day country music festival that promises to be its biggest lineup yet. Jelly Roll will headline on opening day, followed by Post Malone, now blending country and hip-hop, closing out day 2. Other performers include Jesse Murph, Chloe Witzel, Max McCown, and Tyler Hubbard, along with the new Texas Country Stage, showcasing Cody Jinks, Randy Rogers Band, Clay Walker, and more. The event will also feature line dancing, whiskey and tequila tastings, and other festival attractions. Tickets go on sale to the public on Friday, November 7th at 10 a.m. at bootsinthepark.com, with pre-sale access available on November 6th for those who register early. The Leading News is powered by the journalism of the Albuquerque Journal. If you enjoy all of the stories we share with you here daily, please consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Journal by utilizing the discount code in our show notes. Every subscription helps support local journalism and allows us to provide you with the news that matters to you. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Sunny skies are expected today with a high near 72, and as for this evening, mostly clear with a low around 35. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. That's the Leading News. I'm Gino Gutierrez. We'll be back tomorrow.